but we're doing our best. Yeah. You know when you hear like yourself on TV or radio, like, yeah, sounds good. Are we good to go? Okay. So welcome everybody. My colleague Eden Fineday has just lit a smudge over here. It should be ready in a couple of minutes. So if you are feeling called to have a smudge during our talk today, please feel free to do so. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the territory today. We are all grateful to be here on Treaty 1 territory on the homelands of the Cree, the Dene, the Oji-Cree, the Ojibwe, and the Dakota peoples, as well as the Red River Métis. And I'd also like to offer a trigger warning as well, because today we are going to be talking about reporting on residential schools and how our newsroom, our storytelling lodge, as we call it at the time, worked our way through that. So to that, I'm going to turn it over to the IndigiNews team to introduce ourselves. So over to you, Aaron.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Hemens. I'm a reporter with IndigiNews. I am based in the Syilx Okanagan territory. My mother is from the Philippines, and my dad is he comes from England and France, and that's me. I'm one of four people, well, one of four full-time staff on IndigiNews, and yeah, I guess I'll pass it off to Eden. Yeah. Oh, yeah, here.
Tanse, my name is Eden Fineday. I'm from the Sweetgrass First Nation in Treaty 6 in Saskatchewan. I'm the publisher of IndigiNews, and I'm here mostly just for, I don't know, to support, because I actually wasn't working with IndigiNews when we covered the 215, and Kelsie will tell you this, but she was there. She's no longer there, but we asked her to join us on this panel because she was so instrumental in forming a lot of the policy that we now follow as a newsroom when horrible events come to light like this. So yeah, off to you, Kelsie.
I'm just going to do the Cara next because Kelsey's going to have an opportunity to. It's okay. We're just winging it to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cara McKenna. I am the editor at IndigiNews. I'm Alberta Métis through my mom, Carrie Armstrong, and I'm also settler descent, mostly Irish, through my dad, Elwood McKenna. I was born and raised in Treaty 6 homelands and grew up in the city in Amiskwaciy, Waskahitan, colonially known as Edmonton. Currently live in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh homelands, also known as Vancouver.
Thanks, Cara. And for those that just joined us, we did offer a trigger warning because we are going to be talking about residential schools today and how our newsroom, or our storytelling lodge as we refer to it, how we dealt with it at the time when the news broke. And in a couple minutes here, the sage will be lit and we'll have a smudge just in the room. Don't worry, we have permission. We're not going to get rained on. So we just have that as something to turn to if our hearts and spirits need it. I guess it's me, so hello. My name is Anna Mackenzie. On my dad's side, I come from Treaty 5 territory, from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, which is about 6 hours north from here. I have Scots Métis roots in Cumberland House, Saskatchewan, through my grandfather, Murray Mackenzie, who was a photojournalist and took portraits of Indigenous people all over Turtle Island before he passed away in 2007. I'm a mother, and I live in Snuneymuxw territory on Nanaimo. I almost said the Nanaimo First Nation. Snuneymuxw, which is colonially known as Nanaimo, on Vancouver Island, with my daughter. I've been with IndigiNews since it started 3 years ago. Took a break to try law school, and it was really hard. So I came back to what I love, which is writing and truth sharing. And yeah, that's me. So I think Kelsie and I are going to be talking a little bit about our experience as a newsroom during that time. So I'll turn it over to you, Kelsie, to introduce yourself and maybe reflect a little bit on that time.
White House call it East Squeeze Kelsie. I'm from Syilx homelands, where that's my my home, and so I live in Tk'emlúps, which is very briefly been known as Vernon, BC. So I've been with IndigiNews like from the very beginning. I developed the branding for IndigiNews alongside Lindsay Sample, and recently left. Well, it feels recent, but it's not. I think like 2 years or a year ago. Yeah. And have started a business with my sister called Your Syilx Sisters. And it's a trauma-informed and culturally aware communications company. And we do a lot of storytelling and do a lot of training, which we're doing tomorrow. But so when everything had happened with the uncovering of the 215, my sister and I were actually at a funeral, and we were just leaving, and I seen like the headline, that it was the first headline that came across my phone, and it was awful, like just so insensitive. And so we were trying to figure out, how do we report on this? How do we talk about it when it's actively happening to us? And especially like that school, Tk'emlúps, the school there is the one that our family went to that school. And so the stories of those bodies were dinner table conversations growing up. And so it was jarring to have it affirmed in media that way, but also have it just completely tear apart our people. And so the first thing that we started to do was just went into ceremony. For me, I always say our cultures, our teachings are the most and only reliable thing in our life. We can rely on our teachings. We can rely on the land. We can rely on the seasons. And so that's what we jump to when we go through a hard time. We start to go back to the root of things. We go back to the basic teachings, because when you're in grief that deep, you have no choice but to enter your grief ceremony. So that's what I did personally. And then we have something in our nation that we call self-location. It's a process of self-location. So we ask ourselves, who am I in this situation? What is my strength? And we have 4 food chiefs that guide us in that, in our governance. And so those 4 food chiefs is Chief Spitlum, which is the chief bitterroot that represents the mothers, that represent not just mothers. It's not actually by gender or anything like that, but that's what that represents. And when you harvest bitterroot, in it is a little heart. The heart is the seed, and it's an actual little red heart. And so you open it up when you're gathering, and you say a prayer for the future, and you bury it, and it's regenerative how we practice doing that. And so you think of the people that will benefit from those medicines, because it's a ceremonial medicine, and we have to be present at every ceremony with that root. The next is Chief Syilx, which is the youth. They're the dreamers, the creatives, storytellers. And then there's Chief Tk'emlúps, which is our bear, and he is the chief of all things that walk on the land. And he is the elder, so that represents people who are very strong in their protocol and remind everyone to stick to your teachings, remind people how to walk in a good way. And then there's Chief Tk'emlúps, which is our salmon, and that is the chief that represents fathers. It's action-oriented. Those are the people who just will always have a plan on how to get somewhere, and they'll get through anything. They're a very strategic group. And so the first thing we did was we did our storytelling intentions at that time. We all wrote how we were going to be reporting, because we wanted that transparency for people. We wanted to say and share from our own strength and knowing how we were going to report, and we weren't going to come at it in a deficiency or in a place of like heaviness. And so we all decided that we were not going to report, so that we were going to talk about what we were going through individually, and going back to how culture is the most reliable teaching we have. When you go into a grief ceremony, you know what to do. Like my sister and I grew up on the reserve, and when someone passes, there's no question of your role. You know what you do. You go, you prepare food, you ask the family if they need anything done around the house, you know what you're doing. And as soon as that fire is lit, then everything stops. And that's a very sacred time that we call the pause. And it's a pause that we reflect on somebody's life, that we help the loved ones that are remaining, and we become helpers. And so I self-located as a chief Spitlam, so I self-located in that group because that was my strength, was to just be there, like to be alongside my family. So the most important thing for us is when that fire was lit in Tk'emlúps, we stopped all reporting, and we did like a blackout of all of it, because it was being so heavily reported on, which is in our nation. I'm also Secwepemcúl'ecw, so in our nation, it's like very against protocol to have pictures of you taken while you're grieving. So that was one thing, we don't have pictures of it for that reason. We refuse to go against our own protocol. So we didn't take any photos. We did the self-location. So we entered ceremony ourselves, and we walked through the whole process ceremonially. And then we only told stories that were requested of us. People came to us to say, hey, I want to share this story. We never once reached out to any of our kin that went to the school. We never once did, because we were not going to be extractive of that time. We were going to honor that they were in their grief ceremony, and we were going to put them first, because we're syilx first, and that's what I always say, is we're syilx first, and that's our first responsibility. Our first responsibility is to our people, and that's how we decided to go about it, was we were going to honor our people first. And that meant not reporting on it, because there is hundreds of those stories already in the TRC that people can read. And a lot of that at the time was just a lot of trauma porn for people. A lot of people wanting access to our stories, we didn't want to contribute to like, the poor Indian kind of mentality that was going on at the time. We wanted to show love to our people. So instead, we reached out to other young women that we knew were very strongly putting their hearts out for what was happening, that were offering to be grief support, and we interviewed them instead. We asked them to share their medicine through IndigiNews. We asked them to share their medicine through the stories for the people, and that's what we did. We uplifted the people instead, because if we keep putting these images onto our people that we're traumatized, or that we're traumatized people, it just does something to our collective consciousness, and it brings our vibrational levels down. And in our nation, we have a teaching about joy, and that joy is the most important human emotion. It's the most important human thing that we all live and strive to experience. And the reason for that is joy is actually a very high vibrational energy, which means your prayers are powerful when you're in joy. And so that's what we needed to do. We just needed to take care of the people, and that was the stance we took. And we just supported in educating other newsrooms at the time. We created the course that Lauren and I will be delivering tomorrow as a response to it. So instead, we wanted to just share, how do you report on this? Because not every story is yours to tell. And that's why that self-location is important. That's why you check in with yourself to say, is this my story to tell? Can I tell it in a good way? Or will I cause harm? Am I not confident that I won't cause harm? Because if not, that's not a weakness. That's a strength to acknowledge that it's not your story. I think it's such a beautiful thing when people can do that. And so that's kind of where I'll hand it over to Anna, but yes.
Thanks so much, Kelsie. Every time we're reconnected in person or over Zoom, it's just like I could just sit and listen to you speak all day. And if anybody's still around on Saturday, there's a 3-hour training that Kelsie and her sister Lauren, who's here, will be offering. Change the way I looked at the world, and that's all I'll say about that. For anybody who's joined, I have offered a trigger warning. We are going to be talking about residential schools today, and my colleague Eden reminded me that we have some of our kin from the United States here. So if anybody's not familiar with the 215 plus, well, that's what we keep referring it to. It was the day the story broke that there were 215 potential bodies found buried through ground penetrating radar at the former Kamloops Indian Residential School, which in the United States I think is called boarding school. Same difference in Canada, but we called it residential school. Sorry.
Hot charcoal here with some sage if anyone wants to come have a smudge.
Sorry, I'm just taking a minute before I dig in. So no problem. Folks want to come up and have a smudge before I start talking about when I first read the headline of the 215. So I had been at IndigiNews for not quite a year, was still very new in the journalism space, had just moved into a new house. I have 3 children. At the time, they were 8, 4, and 2. Our house was a disaster, boxes upon boxes, chaos everywhere. But as a reporter, I have every news app on my phone, so I get all the breaking news stories. So I remember exactly the moment I was going up the stairs and I got a CBC. I can't even remember if it was CBC. I got just the headline, like 215 children's bodies. And so, like, I was shocked, called my mom right away, called my then partner, and was just like, this is going to change everything, because I've never seen a headline like this before. And this is something that we know and we've known for a long time. As Kelsie said, these were conversations that happened behind closed doors in our family's living rooms and kitchen tables. But this was confirmation for the first time. And I think what made it extraordinarily difficult for me is that I have 3 small Indigenous children. And I couldn't help but picture them being taken from me, or what could have happened to them if they were born in a different time. The night before the news broke, my mom was living with us because it was still pandemic times. She came to help me with the kids. Thank you, Mom, because I was at home. I was at home with 3 kids writing. You guys know there was always kids in the background when I'm trying to work. My mom and I were sitting on the porch, and we were watching the sun go down, and it was this big orange sunset on Nanaimo territory where I live on Vancouver Island. And afterwards, it was beautiful, beautiful sunset. We went back into my mom's room just to kind of debrief on the day. Kids are asleep. She went to go put the curtains down, and we saw this huge white owl flying straight to her window. And it was so shocking. And I didn't put 2 and 2 together until a couple days later, like, of the warning, and then the moment it hit, the, I guess, adrenaline or shock, I don't remember actually what happened immediately after that. I just remember feeling like a lot of just profound sadness and grief. So how were we supposed to show up for work and report on that the next day, right? So when we were discussing this, planning for this conversation, Kelsie reminded me that we all connected on Zoom the next day, and it was probably one of the most emotional conversations I've ever had. I recall that we were all crying. At one point, I was like pretty much howling because I was just feeling so much sadness. And I know now that that sadness actually doesn't come from me. It comes from a long line of people that came before me, and I carry it in my body. And I'll share with you all a very personal story, but it really goes to the heart of blood memory, something that we know and that Western science is just getting caught up on. They're like, oh, people have methyl tags on their DNA that they carry from generation to generation. Like, our people had that wisdom long ago. So my grandmother, Mary Mackenzie, attended residential school. In grade 2, she ran away and had severe frostbite on her hands. So the first time I met my Tk'emlúps, that was the first thing I noticed was her hands. And as a child, it started when I was 4, and my daughter's 4 now. I would have these night terrors where I would be running around the house, and my hands would be super hot, and I would look at them, but they would just feel like no matter what I did, they would curl in. And I still, whenever I'm experiencing anxiety or stress, I can feel like a heat in my hands. So that's the power of the pain that was transferred so deeply through my grandma that her granddaughter dreamt about it. I look at photos of before that time and after that time, and my face completely changed. I looked older. And I will always have gratitude in my heart for the guidance of Kelsie, for at that time, we had just had our funding completely obliterated. So it was just Kelsie and I that were the full-time reporters at IndigiNews. So as we were managing and carrying this grief, not only were we there supporting our families, loving up our children, and doing the best we could to keep parenting, we needed to reflect and reground ourselves, because I completely just was not in a good way. So my partner at the time brought in some elders from Nanaimo. It's not my culture, but I needed like a spiritual, I needed something to keep me going. So I did a cedar brush ceremony, and the elder Bernadette, who came and was with me, she was holding my hands, and she said, you cannot hold on to it. It'll destroy you. So in that moment, I had to make the decision that this isn't going to destroy me. I know it's destroyed my aunties, uncles, grandparents. I'm not going to let this destroy me or affect the relationship that I have with my children. So I have to do the work to shield them so that they don't have to feel the pain that I felt at that time. Sorry, just a sec. So right after, without a care in the world, another headline broke of 700 potential children's bodies at Cowessus for a school there. And my dad called me, and he was like, I'm ready to tell the truth that I went to day school, and these are the things that happened to me. So it was the honor of a lifetime to open my heart to hear his truth and to be the carrier of that truth. And I wanted to honor that love and that relationship in the best way that I knew how, so I wrote about it. And I wrote a story that really reflects the relationship I have with my dad, and it's called On Love and Intergenerational Trauma. And those were the first pieces that we published. Our newsroom went dark because that was the protocol that we followed, and that was the most important thing to do, not to get to the story first, not to find the right source, not to get out to Kamloops. It was to sit back, do the self-location, follow the protocols that Kelsie was bringing forward, and to do the work that we needed to do to reground ourselves and to get back to it, to start telling stories in a good way. So that's what we did. I want to share this beautiful photo that was taken after the protocol. We were able to take pictures, and this is actually a photo of Kelsie's 3 beautiful children. And that summer, after the 215, we actually all went on a retreat and brought all of our kids and just barbecued and watched movies and did crafts and painted our nails and just did all the things, that kids just like run around and have fun, and we all got to connect. So I love this picture because it just speaks 1,000 words, and that's what Kelsie does with her photographs. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you both, Anna and Kelsie, for speaking and sharing these very deeply personal stories. we really appreciate you two for being here and your energy, and thank you both. You're both powerful people, and I'm so glad to know you both and to have learned from you two, and thank you. Something that I've heard throughout the conference is this idea of objectivity in journalism. And maybe either of you could you speak to this idea of objectivity? How do you be objective as a reporter in these situations when, I mean, you're writing about tragedies that are literally affecting you and your community? Like, is objectivity even a thing? Like, you know, can you be objective in a situation like that?
It doesn't even cross my mind, to be honest, because I feel like, you know, as the saying goes, everybody has mud on their feet from somewhere, so we all come into everything with our own perspectives, no matter what. There's, you know, it feels like a fallacy. And so that's why self-location is so important, I think, is knowing your strength to speak to something and going with your integrity. And that's the most important thing, is having that personal integrity in your storytelling. And so for me, when I remember, you know, like I write about my kids often. They're often like parts of a lot of my stories. And we have actually started to do at the bottom of our stories, having a kinship protocol, we call it, and we just share that they're related, they're our relative. We share, because especially as Indigenous people, we're related to everybody. So we have huge families, we have huge connections. You know, our network's strong. And so, you know, that it's a really difficult thing. And I think that's something that would try to keep a lot of Indigenous people from sharing their stories, is by, you know, basically only a cis white male journalist is the only one, like, you know, according to the rules of journalism, you know, that can tell a so-called objective story. So I think it's a really good way to keep us silenced. And so we just be transparent about everything, about that our kinships are our strength. They're not a weakness in our storytelling.
I was hoping to butt in with a question, if you don't mind. I was just thinking about how our editorial stuff sort of changed around that time, and one of the style rules that we sort of started putting into place because of you, Kelsie, was putting quotations around the word school when we talk about residential schools. And I was hoping you could explain sort of why you chose to bring that style rule into place. Like, I think it's really great for many reasons, but just have you talk more about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the written word is so powerful for that, right? To make you question the validity of school, because for our people it wasn't a school, and so putting the quotations around questioning what that is, that might be what they called it, but that's not really what it was. And then same thing is, you know, how we put quotations around colonial place names as well, questioning the validity of those places as the name. And so, yeah, I think it's a really good, powerful way to have people question those things without, you know, having to always over-explain in a story. Rather, just put the quotations there and allow people to bring their own perspective into that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, just while we were talking about the story too, I was thinking about how simply the act of pausing and reflecting is very radical in journalism. I don't think that's something we do very often. And for me, when we had decided to stop publishing, I had this initial feeling like, what? Like, how are we gonna not cover this? Like, I'm so used to just running after a story. And so I think that was a really big teaching for me of, like, you know, what about protocol? What about all of these things? Just been so indoctrinated into like rushing around to get the story. And so that really changed the way that I personally think about covering tragedies, especially in other people's communities. Like, most people that were descending on Tk'emlúps didn't know anything about the protocol, didn't know anyone there. They were just going to try to like fish for stories from survivors. So anyway, it was a powerful teaching for me as well, so thank you.
did you have more? Or I have a lot of questions here. Did you have more to your present? Okay. Okay. On the note of like this parachute like journalism, I guess Kelsie or Anna, like, what are some big things a journalist shouldn't do when they're, I guess, parachuting into a community that isn't theirs and covering like a traumatic event?
I had an experience during this time where I was contacted by a reporter, and I'm not going to point any fingers or name any names, but he called to say that he read my piece and wanted to know if I could drive out to Kamloops the next day to co-report with him. And at this time, we weren't reporting on it. It was my daughter's birthday party, her second birthday party, so I was like, no, sorry, I can't go. And he said, well, I'd just really appreciate being able to just call you if I need advice. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not from there. I don't know what possible advice I could offer you. And he did end up calling me, and his question was, how do I talk to the elders? I'm like, you talk to the elders like they're human beings, and when you're with them, you're on creator's time. There's no timeline. You're just there. And I think that's like the opposite of parachute journalism, where you're going in, you're getting the quote, you're getting the photo, you're talking to maybe 1, 2, 3 people, pulling from a press release, putting it out the door, there you go. Not really thinking about the impact that that's going to have. So that was just like another compounding piece where we were like, holy shit, nobody knows how to report on this, and everybody is looking at Kelsie to quickly, as fast as you can, put together a trauma-informed guide so people can quickly report on this story. So we are very, very careful and cautious. I think we really put in a lot of heart and time into being trauma-informed and to be accountable and to care for our kin, regardless of who they are or where they come from. So that was my experience with somebody who attempted to do parachute journalism and bring him along with me, and I said no.
Also known as tokenism.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot to me. That happened to me even last month, where some folks from Germany came over, a documentary film crew, and like this happens several times to me a year, where they're like quickly like, oh, we really need you to do this, or we want your support, we want you to connect us. But I hold my connections as like very sacred. I earned all of my relationships, and I've earned all of my kinships. I've been genuine, I've been authentic, and I've prayed with people. I've ceremonied with people that I write with, and so for me, I don't do that. I also don't appreciate being rushed all the time. It's always like it's on their time. They're just wanting to come in and get the story. They don't want to do the work of building the relationships the way that I have, which means they don't care about my people. And I don't want to work with anybody like that. And I'm very clear about those things, and I'm very clear that I just tell people that that's really damaging. Our people are not just stories. We're humans. It takes a lot. Like tomorrow in our course, we'll go over the safety plans that we set up with people who want to share their story with us. There's a lot of ceremony that goes into it. There's so much work that goes into it. We self-locate before we do stories like that. And so it's not something that is so trivial the way that it's been, processed. And when I was at the ceremony with my family at Tk'emlúps, just when we were doing ceremony there every day, there was reporters, like, I remember them grabbing elders and asking them to pose in front of the school and taking their photos. And this one elderly gentleman stood up and he yelled at the reporters, and he said, "We are not your daily news cycle. Like, put your cameras away." Only one of the reporters put his camera away. The rest literally didn't listen and just kept capturing it and just kept recording. And that's our ceremony. We're not allowed to have our ceremonies on camera. We're not allowed to have our ceremonies recorded. It is for our heart. It is for the wellness of us. It is not to be used as a story. So it was really dehumanizing. And I was extremely ashamed to be a journalist and be a part of the media. And that's why I was like, I'm going to write something about this. I was so angry. I was so angry to watch that happen. And while that's happening within our community, we were having people like trying to commit suicide. We were having people falling off of the Red Road journey they were on for years. Our grandfather locked himself in his room, and so it wasn't just a story at the time. It was very real. And so for us, we had to do something, so we just decided to pour out love. But that, I think we have to be accountable to our industry as well. And so I was, I had to, in our nation, we believe that we are responsible for the roles that we play. As a journalist, I was responsible for my people's wellness at the time within my own industry, which is why we created the training. It was literally an emergency response because people are dying from it. And yeah, so that's what I'll share about that.
It was you and Lauren Kelsie who kind of opened my eyes to how journalism is inherently colonial. And I was just wondering if you could maybe speak to us about how, decolonizing newsrooms can, shift the media culture around trauma exploitation to, trauma-informed reporting.
Yeah, decolonizing journalism or decolonizing the media is something that I think we can do because storytelling itself is inherently Indigenous. And so and only Indigenous people can decolonize. At least that's my belief. And otherwise you can uncolonize. You can uncolonize aspects of your work. You can uncolonize aspects of your thought process. You can widen and broaden your horizon. It's just a different process for both people, right? And so for us, it would be decolonizing. And we can do that. I really do believe that we can do that in newsrooms. And that's why we've changed a lot of that language to, not being a newsroom, but being a storytelling lodge, having something as, simple as that. Moving away from like so-called HR policies to doing like kinship protocols. How do we show up for each other and taking care of ourselves through creating story? And so one of the things that we did was created a story about, at the time, we were trying to figure out how to guide our work and decolonizing the media. So we wrote a story about a canoe journey and how that canoe journey, the journey itself is decolonizing the media. And then the canoe is what carries us from camp to camp, from story to story. It brings us down the river. And we can easily remember story because as Indigenous people, story is everything to us. It's our laws. So we can remember story. And so as long as we keep returning back to that, like when the uncovering of the 215 happened in our story, that means we pulled the canoe off of the river. We took a pause to go into ceremony together. We went all to our respective homelands to do our ceremonies. And I think, that's a really big part of showing up as we want to see others do that as well. So just being that example and trying to take the lead on, we don't have to do this. We don't have to harm ourselves in this process, and we don't have to harm people in this process. And so trauma-informed journalism is truly just being human. And as I was writing the training, that's all I thought about. I was like, it's like I'm literally begging for our humanity. It's weird. Like it's such an odd thing to me to think about. And so, so I think it's a evolving thing, but I think it's possible. I mean, I know it's possible, but people have to be willing to take risks. People have to be willing to stand up for their integrity. People have to be willing to stand up for other people, and in the newsrooms and media as it exists today.
So more than 2 years later, do you think journalists around the world have learned from this, or do you still see these problematic practices persisting?
Yeah, I just wanted to share because I've noticed the ripple effects of the work that you've done, and that 215, that was the start of a massive reckoning across the entire country. I don't know if it's in the States as well, but that's just unleashed all these other stories everywhere. And one of the stories that I covered was when the Pope came to Musqueam and Lac St. Anne in Alberta. And I didn't think IndigiNews would get to go because it was very limited capacity, but we ended up going. And before going out to this Pope visit, all of the media was given a trauma-informed guide, essentially. That was like, here's how to approach survivors, here's what to think about if you're going to approach survivors, here's some basic humanity, of, you know, just what to think about, because a lot of international media was descending on those visits. And I don't know about all of you, but I never learned about trauma-informed anything in journalism school. And so I think just having that conversation and having that unfold and seeing that guide come out before going to this mass gathering of survivors who are going through an extremely traumatizing and triggering time, I knew for a fact that that was a direct result of your work and the work that has been done to have that conversation. So I've definitely seen the impacts that it's made.
Because of Kelsie, so I want to acknowledge you, Kelsie, for doing that, because you can see the ripple effects all across Turtle Island and the way that, and all around the world on the way that people are talking about us now. And I just honored to know you.
Thank you.
I guess it's kind of everything I wanted to ask. I guess we can open the floor now to questions from the audience. If anybody has some questions or comments for any of us here.
Maybe just, sorry, I'm so sorry. Just before we go, I'm really sorry. I really wanted to touch on this point, and I actually wrote it down on the card. I wrote down teddy bears, because I wanted to leave everybody with some joy and hope, some higher frequency energy after going deep down into the depths of my heart. After I had ceremony, I connected with a friend I have in Snuneymuxw and Snuneymuxw territory, and she connected with an elder, and the elder said that they wanted to have a gathering. So we put something together really, really quickly, and it was the elder's idea for everybody to bring a teddy bear for children who didn't have teddy bears, so for somebody to hug. And so in the spirit of hope and resilience, we showed up. I was with my 3 kids, and we were standing in this big pavilion, and we literally, I would say 500 people showed up with teddy bears. And so there was this big, big thing of teddy bears pinned with cash. Children brought chalk, and people were writing messages. And so it was a really beautiful show of community support. I know that we struggled because Canada Day was shortly after, and we were pleading with people to reconsider openly celebrating during a time of profound grief. But this moment just reminded me that there are good people, and there are good people with good intentions in the world, and that really lifted me up. And all the money, there was, I think, over $5,000 went to Kwamut Child and Family Services to help support Indigenous kids in the foster care system in BC. So there was hope that came out of that grief, and I just wanted to share that. So yeah, questions?
That's a great question. Thanks, Erin. Tech support. So self-location is an inherent process of our Tk'emlúps, it's called, which is a ceremonial process of coming together in a collective consciousness to basically come to a consensus on anything. And so how we do that is we have the 4 food chiefs, and anytime there is a decision, a choice, or something you have to do, you start to question your strength. You start to find out where is your strength. Self-location is all about using your strength within you to do whatever work it is and let that frame your work. So again, like we use the 4 food chiefs, and so we come up to any process or anything, I ask myself, who am I in this situation? Because sometimes I might be Chief Tk'emlúps, which is the salmon. I might have a very good idea to execute. I have the plan, I have the strategy, I can get it done. But you have to be always mindful of all the other food chiefs that are also there. We have a polarity and a balance, and so the polarity for Chief Tk'emlúps is Chief Spitlum, the mothers, and we need both perspectives to be balanced. It's such an intense form of like a self-awareness, I guess, but expanding your viewpoint. So the word Anaukenweek breaks down to many droplets of rain going into the top of your head, or water going into the top of your head. And what that is every droplet is somebody else's perspective on one topic. And everyone's perspective in our nation is important. There is nothing there's nobody, no voice, no teaching, no nothing that is not equally as important as someone else's. So when you have all those perspectives going into your mind, then you find your strength, and then you can do your work. So the process of that, I'll kind of give a better example. Lauren and I went to an Anaukenweek, and we had a question in our community. And when we go to an Anaukenweek, we come with the question, and the question is the conflict, or is whatever needs to be discussed. And it was, how can we re-enliven culture in our community? And so I chose to sit in the mothers group because I had heart for it. So the mothers group never forgets about people. They are always mindful. They use their heart deeply, and they think of everybody. They think of communities, or they think of the Stamayak kin that often get left out of conversations. And Stamaya is our is Two-Spirit. It means doe with antlers. So just making sure that you're thinking of the children in a process, that you're thinking of everybody, and that's your role and responsibility, is to bring all those into the forefront. So using that strength, you go to the table with it, and you decide as a group of people who also chose to be in the mothers group to go to the table and say, this is what we're thinking, and everyone's thoughts are beautiful. Like everybody's thoughts are, we look at it through beauty. And so it's very valid. We listen to people, and there's no arguments allowed. You have to honor that someone has a polar thought, because that is actually what expands and grows who you are. And so even if it feels like, I think that a lot when I come into a conflict with somebody, I'm like, I bet they're just bipolar. There's something I can learn here. But self-locating is coming to something with your strength, but also being aware that if you're like, I'm going to come to this with my heart. My strength right now is that I can be a really good helper for someone grieving. And if that's your strength, then that's where you write from. That's the stories you choose to tell are based in that, which is what I did. And then if it's another one that's like, if you're sort of self-locating, I guess it's Chief Tk'emlúps at the time, more like power-driven, like policy, then maybe you're the one who shows up with the wood for the fire, like you're out there doing the action-oriented items that need to be done. And so you can self-locate and then ask yourself, if you can't do those things, or you can't bring yourself to the conversation in a good way where you're like, I might cause harm, it's also okay to step back, right? And it's okay to say that this is not my story. And then maybe find someone who you're like, wow, this person would be great to tell this story, because maybe this is their community, or they might have insight on things. And yeah, just being self-aware really is kind of what it comes down to. But we go very in depth to it in our training and how to self-locate. We have all the questions and everything in there, so.
Happening tomorrow, folks.
Yeah. Yeah, my sister and I, we just train anywhere, honestly, that people want to bring us in. We do like virtual or in person, but yeah, it's something that we're definitely very passionate about, and do for a variety of different organizations. So yeah, thank you so much too for sharing. I think the greatest thing, that you can do is just acknowledge that you're accountable to yourself, right? And so, and that's such a powerful thing, and it's such a powerful thing to be accountable to our people, to be accountable to how we hold our people, and so. I know I've had like that question a lot before where they're like, what do we do? And Lauren and I have like, we're at 5 people now who have quit their workplaces after they've taken our training. Because, like we say, we show up syilx first. We show up as humans of the land first. And that's all that can guide me, and that's the only advice I can give to others is because I'm not telling you to quit, but like also I don't want to be responsible for that. but show up with your teachings and your integrity, and you'll never go wrong. That was the best advice I got given when I first started journalism, and that was from oh my goodness. Her name is escaping me, but she said the best thing you can do is be yourself, be authentic, be true to yourself, and show up for yourself first. And that I don't want to tell you to quit. So, right? Yeah. Or they'll all be at Indigenous.
Can I just say something too? I just wanted to reflect back to you, like what I'm hearing you say, because really what I'm hearing you say is, how do I get these people, like how do I get to matter to these people? And that's a fucking disgusting position to be in. You should feel that you matter, and what I'm hearing you say is, they don't respect you, they don't trust you, they don't know you, they're not honoring you. You're not safe there. Right? And why do we allow these organizations to hire one Indian, check off the box, and then go on to destroy their spirit for the entire time they're with your organization? Why do we allow that? And like, the industry right now is not in a great place. It's not like you can quit and be like, there's 12 offers I have on the table. Like, everyone's afraid. We're in a scarcity mindset right now, especially in Canada with a legislation that just passed, and Meta is blocking all news on our Facebook and Instagram in Canada. Like, it's insane. But I just want to say to you, I see you, and it's so painful and lonely to be the only Indian in the room, and you're not safe there, and I want better for you. All of us deserve better. So I just wanted to say that. Now we call it the Auntie and Uncle Council.
Yeah, basically everyone needs to come tomorrow for the training. Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question? It was
When you come back to report on it after the protocol, how do you approach the story? Or do you feel even a need to say, let's report on this, not specifically trauma, but what is it how are you trying to tell the story after those days that you've given yourselves time to
Yeah. Yeah, so we, again, only did stories where they asked us to do the story. And then we were very transparent with the process of what storytelling looks like. Because you relive trauma several times through a storytelling process when you're telling these kinds of stories. And, you do it when you're in your initial interview, you do it when you get to see the first draft, which is something that we've implemented at IndigiNews, is allow, especially around traumatic stories, that every single person has agency of their story. They have agency of how they are talked about. So we always get them to approve a draft first. And that gives people self-determination as well. And so we just go through the whole safety. Sorry, I was trying to gather my thought. We were going through the whole safety plan with them. And part of the safety plan is going through what that process looks like. A lot of people, once I've shared what the actual process looks like, have actually decided not to do the story. Because they're like, oh, you're right. I don't need my trauma to be judged by the world. I don't need to have that, right? And so that was a part of it. And then also just honoring how they want the story told. And then also giving them back all of their images and everything. I always gave people their recordings as well, as part of data sovereignty, which we'll discuss tomorrow. But honoring that people's stories are theirs to hold and to have, and are important, that is reflective of them. And so we only just did it by invite only, and we were very transparent with the process of it. And we held it with such care, and we used personal protocol of storytelling for engaging in those stories too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think too, it's just, we have to ask ourselves why we're telling certain stories. And I think, like Kelsie said, we went through the TRC, we've heard about a lot of the horrors that have taken place. And so for me, I'm not sure why I would need to write a story necessarily that just leads with someone's trauma and talks about the darkest moments of their lives being abused, when we need to advance the narrative at some point. And I think we have to innovate and think, what's the reason for telling this story, and why are we telling this story, instead of just going by that, if it bleeds, it leads. Like, we're just gonna tell a story for the sake of a story. Like, especially as Indigenous people, it's like just being intentional with the story and thinking about what we want to put out in the world and the reason behind it, I think goes a really long way. And just that extra step of, I guess, care and critical thinking it goes a really long way.
Sorry, just a moment. Just as I was putting together the presentation, I think the first story that we published once we came back was actually called Vernon. And that was a really powerful story because Vernon, BC, was going to continue this huge Canada Day celebration in the midst of all this. So Kelsie wrote a really powerful accountability piece, which for me, it's one of my favorite parts of my job is holding people to account. And there's always those opportunities to ask those questions, to hold those people that are in power accountable. And on the subject of these aging plans, this is something like as a trauma-informed training. This is something that I do too when I'm reporting on the child welfare system, is creating that safety plan, having like a space afterwards to connect, just like having that relationship. Like I still keep in touch with some of the people that I trained with, and so I keep tabs on them because I care, and I check in on them because I care. And I think that we're in a lot of ways just humanizing journalism. Maybe that's why we call it storytelling, because it is something different. We have our facts, we have everything together, but that's just such a who we are. So hope that answers your question.
I wanted to hear more about the policies you have around showing sources graphs and whether that applies to like every story and all sources and whether it's
Oh, yeah, it's not every story. If it's an accountability piece, it's not something we would be like, do you like this? It's like, what do you think? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's when it's a story that's heavily impacted with trauma. We make sure that it's as sensitive as possible. We want people to have their selves just accurately depicted. And so there's no real policy around it. It's just we kind of decide collectively or with our editor, like, actually I just show drafts to everybody anyways, but like even if they're not, because I just think that there's such power in our people finally having a say of how we're represented in media. And so that for me is the whole purpose of it. And so even like good story, like just I do a lot of more like uplifting stories because we have enough trauma stories. So I'll even show those, and I just want to make sure, I always tell them, I just want to make sure your quotes are in context. I want to make sure that if there's thoughts that you had later on that you want to add in now, like we can do that, and just give them complete agency over their own story and identity.
Yeah, I remember one time I tweeted about how I showed a story to an elder because he had asked me to cover a ceremony, and it was a Tla'amin ceremony, and I was like, can I just show you the story? Because like I'm not Tla'amin, and I just want to make sure that this is right. And I just thought, I was tweeting about it for some reason, like thinking that it would be the most reasonable thing in the world, and I got blown up on by all these journalists that were like, that's so unethical, and I just thought like, what?
whatever you tell non-native people about your approach, especially non-native journalists, is there like a kind of typical reaction that you get? Because I'm trying to imagine explaining that to like my professors, my teachers. Oh my gosh, their heads would blow up. Like they just genuinely could not understand the kind of sensitivity that's required to talk about these kinds of issues. So with that, I was wondering what kinds of reactions you guys get when it comes to people blowing up on Twitter or the kind of messages.
I think people think we're like extremely radical, but it doesn't really bother us that much. Like, I think we're just used to that, and it's just us being ourselves as well. Like, one of the things that people hate is the fact that we put Canada in quotations, so it's like Canada, or like we say so-called Canada, and people hate that. We just got the angriest letter that was like, I'm unsubscribing because I find this very offensive, and it's just our perspective. So I think it's a perspective that's been excluded for so long, and so it doesn't really matter. Like, we're a mostly Indigenous newsroom, so writing for Indigenous people, so not to sound rude, but I don't really care what non-Indigenous journalists think.
We talked
I just want to say that it's 4:08, so we're past. But we do have many shirts that say decolonize the media, and they're just to give out. So if anyone wants to come and just chat with us and get a shirt, like, we'll be here for a little bit longer until we get kicked out, I guess.
Yes. Please like and subscribe to our newsletter.
Oh yeah, go to our website, because we're not on Facebook anymore. I was just going to say that at first it was going to be an hour and a half session, so I don't know if that still says that somewhere, but. Was it? Okay, yeah.
It
Yeah,
said
I
on the
thought-
door 4.
But I think on the website it said 4, so anyway.
Oh.
Yeah, I think we were getting mixed messages.
Well, we could just stay if we want. Like, I don't have anywhere to be, so.
Party!
Can I maybe add something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so Kelsie and Lauren's training is here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. in this room, so just so you know. But yeah, me being, I'm non-Indigenous. I went to, Carleton journalism. I have a prof in the room right now who I learned from, Alan Thompson. Good to see you. But, taking Kelsie and Lauren's training and, even just being an IndigiNews for, over a year now, it's kind of really almost thrown everything I've learned out at J School. It's kind of thrown it out the window. But it's good though. It's really, it's really, like, they taught me to be a good human being is like what it comes down to. It's being a good person and, seeing like the people, the stories you write, like these are, like, they're human beings, right? Like in school, they tell you to separate yourself from the story, but it's just not, it's not possible, I don't think. And yeah, I really recommend everyone stop by their workshop. They're really brilliant people, and like there's just so much to learn about storytelling, and just blow your mind. Like just expand your worldview with so many different things. Like, it's such a beautiful presentation and workshop, and I'll probably be there again. So yeah. Yeah. That's okay. That's me. I'm done.
Yeah. I just like to say I also have a prof in the room right now, Catherine. But yeah, I know what you're saying, Erin. I think both of us came from really traditional news backgrounds, and I was telling Kelsie yesterday, I was just gushing to her about everything I've learned from her, and I think I was just so indoctrinated in so many ways. And like, I love news, I love working in news, but there's so many things in the culture that are so toxic, and we just don't question it because it's like, that's just the way it is, that's just our culture. And so I think there's a lot of power in just taking some of that agency back and questioning the way we do things, because that's basically our job, to question other people and question systems and interrogate them. So I think interrogating our own system is part of that as well.
Hallelujah.
I wanted to say something about objectivity, if you don't mind me piping in, because I thought of this when you were talking about it earlier, but I think it's a really interesting concept that what we think of as objectivity is actually just like being outside of something, looking in as like an outsider, and somehow that gets to be objective. For instance, like what makes a news reporter objective if they're reporting on Tk'emlúps 215? Is it that they're just not from there and they're white men and they're not native, and so suddenly that they have objectivity and we don't? Really what they have is subjective also, it's just over there. It's a different type of subjectivity. It's the subjectivity of the outsider looking in, like anthropology. Like, it's like, I think whiteness tries to create this idea that white men can just sort of like roam the earth, like commenting on things and like digging up dead bodies and being like, let's see how these people live. Like, it's like they're separate and apart, and somehow that makes them like less emotional about it or something. I don't understand why that's our standard, I guess.
Yeah, it's like, I think there's this idea that a lot of us have heard, like, oh, you're biased because if you're Indigenous, you have a bias, and so you can't report on that without being biased. And it's like, why isn't that told to every white guy covering city council? Like, it's silly. Yeah, I feel like once you start asking these questions, it's like a house of cards and it all comes tumbling down. And then you're like, wait, whose perspective? Whose bias? Like, what does it mean? And then it just all collapses and then you end up just in a circle. So.